Up to the 30, the 20, 10, 5. Torrey Horton back to the end zone.
48-yard play. Guess who? Body up the middle, making another move to the outside. 15, 10, end zone again.
Keeps it. Nice move by Brown. He's got space. He's got 6. 35-yard touchdown for Byron Brown. A record-setting night for the South Florida quarterback.
Down so far, a little bit of a high snap. Genty right up the middle. Genty has room. Ashton Genty, give him 6.
Second and long. Lagar tries to fit it in. Rose, it does. Rose stays up. The Suns offense 4-3 wheels. Incredible effort for Rose.
The G5 Hive. All G5, all the time.
Welcome to the G5 Hive Live. We are excited to bring you the G5 college football coverage you love each and every week. I am Luke. Always get my fingers mixed up. I am joined by my co-host, Justice. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're like Eric Froton, who got here early, actually right on time, we just started a little bit late, thanks to me. Make sure you go out and you comment. We'll try to get to everybody's comments as the show goes on. If you have something, please ask. We'll get it out there. And if you're watching us on X, please give us a follow, a like, a retweet. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Justin and I have some big news. We talked about it a little bit last week, but it is a pinned tweet on our X. Justice, do you want to talk a little bit about this before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, our merch store is now available live. I will put the link in the comments. I literally just got the word probably 5 minutes ago from the provider that it's available. So yeah, if you want to support us, the best ways to support the work that we do here is number one, go to YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and number two, visit the merch store, get yourself some sweet gear. We got shirts, long sleeve, short sleeve, performance shirts, fleeces, hoodies, all the above. So yeah, visit the merch store. The link is in the video comments on YouTube. It's also pinned to our Twitter page, X page, whatever you want to call it. It's a twin. It's pinned to the top there, so you can find the link there. So yeah, super excited about that. Now moving on to our waiver wire honey for week 8 for G5, and we're going to start off with Luke and the quarterbacks. You're muted, Luke.
Only thing more undefeated than a mute button is bye weeks. So got me there. We're here to give you the waiver wire honey here, and I'm gonna tackle quarterbacks first. Talked about it earlier in his big game, but Ben Wooldridge, Louisiana, 26% owned. Here's his last 5 weeks in points. 6-point passing touchdowns is my settings that I'm looking at. 39.6, 40.25, 16.8, 30.4, and 42.85. Great weeks. Something you did last week, Justice, that I decided to follow suit with this week. I put them in order of here's these 5 guys that I'm like, hey, we should probably go out and get them. And then the next 5, it's like, okay, if you need kind of more of a boom bust, if you need maybe they're not as reliable week to week. Maybe those are the guys that you need to pick up. But he's had a rushing touchdown in all of those games except for his 16.8 performance. They're on a bye. Then they have Texas State, Arkansas State, South Alabama, Troy, Louisiana Monroe. I'm a little bit nervous for the Louisiana Monroe game, but overall, that's not a Texas State shootout. Arkansas State should have no problems. Hopefully, shootout with South Alabama. Troy, they should be able to pass on. He's got a pretty good end of season. And then we've got Parker Navarro, assuming that, he is the starter going forward. I do like what he's been doing. He's been running the ball. He's 14% owned. Mac plays here. He's he's getting 30-plus points each week in conference, minus last week when they played Miami of Ohio. He had 8.2, but Miami of Ohio, solid defense. He's a dual threat. They've got Buffalo, then a bye, Kent State, Eastern Michigan, Toledo, Ball State. I'm nervous about the Toledo game, but everything else, I think he should be just fine. Spencer Petras, Utah State, 14% owned. He's a 2020 guy. We talked about, I gave him all of his praises earlier. He's a guy that should be owned. And then Caden Veltkamp, Western Kentucky, 30% owned. He's right at that threshold. We're trying to find guys that are 30% owned or less. His last 5 weeks, 40.75, 40.1, 25.2, 32.1, 55.9. Those are great outputs. They're on a bye. Then Kennesaw State, New Mexico State, Louisiana Tech, Liberty, Jacksonville State. Nothing that really scares you. My next 5, like I said, kind of up and down guys, maybe guys to take a shot on. We talked to. I was surprised he didn't win the game or win the job in the spring. If you want to move over to the next slide, is Touchdown Tommy or Tommy Touchdown. I'm trying to remember. Oh, sorry, he's on this list.
He's on this one. Yeah.
5% owned, Kent State. He's had fantasy outputs of 40.45, 42.7, and the stinker of 1.9. But once he's been in the game, they've been tossing the ball around, and he's been looking, pretty good. They got Western Michigan. Again, we talked about leading the MAC. I assume they run an up-tempo game. I feel like this could be a sneaky, high-scoring game. They've got a bye. They play Ohio, then Miami. That'll be a tough game, and then Akron and Buffalo. So, not a lot of games that really scare you. I like Touchdown Tommy or Tommy Touchdown. I can't remember which one they said. I think it's Tommy Touchdown. But I like him. And then the next 5 are guys that are kind of up and down. We'll see, what we're scraping the bottom of the barrels of these guys. But Colton Joseph, ODU, 2%. He's a dual threat. He's got over 60 yards rushing in his last 4 games, in each of his last 4 games. Justice highlighted as a possible shootout game with Texas State. They get that 24-14 win. He's got 35.6 points. He had 111 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. They've got Georgia Southern this week, then App State, a bye, JMU, Marshall, and Arkansas State.
Georgia Southern and App State are bad against the run too. So,
JMU depends on what team you get. They're maybe the team I'm most scared about. But hey, again, it's up and down. We'll see. But I like Colton Joseph, Jalen Kitna, UAB 0% owned. They're on bye. If he's able to come back, like I said, he's leading some of these G5 or at least top 5 in these G5 categories of throwing the ball, yardage, all that stuff. They've got to buy Tulsa, UConn, Memphis. He's at 45 pass attempts, 288 yards and over average over his last 3 games. Evan Simon, Temple, 5% owned, averaging 30.36 fantasy points over his last 3 weeks. They've got ECU this week, new coaching staff. What can he do against that team? Then they've got to buy, then Tulsa, FAU, UTSA, and then North Texas. If you need a floor guy, I like Evan Simon going forward and his schedule. Owen McCown, he's a 2020 guy. His last 2 weeks, he's been up and down, but his last 2 weeks, he's had 36.1 and 31.2 points. They've got Tulsa, Memphis by North Texas, Temple, and then Army. So a tough one there against Army. Maybe we have a shootout with Memphis. We'll see how Memphis' defense plays. But again, Tulsa, North Texas, Temple, I like those matchups. And then Evan Bullock, Louisiana Tech, 1% owned. He's a boom bust play. He's had 11.2, 49.4, 19.95 points his last 3 games. They've got UTEP, which I like, Sam Houston. Again, Sam Houston's been playing well on defense, but they can be passed on. Jacksonville State, Western Kentucky, Arkansas, which that's going to be a tough game. SEC tries to put in those cupcakes there at the end, and then Kennesaw State. So I like Evan Bullock for Louisiana Tech if you're looking for somebody.
All right, moving over to the running backs, kind of took the same approach as last week. These first 5 guys would be my priority ads. The second 5 are probably more deeper plays. Number 1, running back Rasul Faison, Utah State, 27% owned, 2020 guy, 20.8 points, 17.8 points, 19 points, and 24.5 points in the last 4 games. I feel pretty confident that after this week, he will be above that 30% threshold. Next up, running back Elijah Gilliam, Fresno State, only 6% owned. Malik Sherrod is out, and it looks like he's going to be out for a couple weeks here. And while he's been out, Gilliam's 22.8 points and 28 points in the last 2 games. Next up, my player of the week, AJ Turner, Marshall, 15% owned. He has limited touches, but man, he puts up almost 100 yards every week, averaging almost over 10 yards per carry. And he just had a monster game in week 8, 45.7 points. Ahmad Hardy, UL Monroe, 19% owned. Once again, a 2020 guy, double-digit carries all season, 3 100 yards games in his last 3 game points of 16.7, 14.2, and 31.4. UL Monroe loves to pound the rock and play good defense, and Ahmad Hardy is a big part of that. And then rounding out these 5, Delbert Mims III, Eastern Michigan, 11% owned. The last 3 weeks, 30.6, 18.5, 14.2. He's getting 20-plus touches per game. He's really coming on strong for Eastern Michigan in MAC play. All right, these next 5 guys are going to be more boom bust, kind of deeper dives into the running back landscape. Jacquez Cross, Arkansas State, 19% owned. In his last 3 games, he has 33.1, 22.5, and 12.7 points. Elijah Young, Western Kentucky, 9% owned. He has 16-plus carries in each of the last 3 weeks. He's also been involved in the passing game with 11 targets over those 3 weeks. Michael Dukes, Georgia State, 0% owned. This is probably more a play in a PPR league. He has 5, 8, and 7 targets the last 3 weeks with 6.3, 16.6, and 28.9 points in those last 3. Someone that we've been talking about, I've been talking about, feels like since probably February, Javen Jacobs, running back at New Mexico, only 2% owned. He has that dual eligibility, wide receiver and running back. In his last 5, he has 12.3 points, 17.8 points, 15.1 points, 5.2 points, and 21 points in his last 5 games. And then rounding out this group is Brandon High. This is kind of a dynasty play, a freshman there, redshirt freshman for UTSA, kind of taking over that backfield. He's only 1% owned, but in the last 4 weeks, he's had 13.4, 16.5, 2.2, and 15 points in those games, the last 4. Again, Brandon High, UTSA Roadrunners, probably a deeper dive in a dynasty league play.
He's looked explosive too. I've liked the way
Yes.
he's been running.
Absolutely.
Wide receivers, again, same approach. Guys that I feel pretty comfortable with here, the first 5, and then more dart throws here at the back half. Amari Hayes, FIU, he's 11% owned. Again, he was a late scratch last week. They have a bye this week. Then they've got South Florida, ECU, Temple, Charlotte, Tulsa. None of those matchups scare me. He's had 17-plus points in his last 2 weeks, minus obviously the game he did not play. But I like Amari Hayes. We like that slot receiver there at FAU. He's been that for them. Raylan Sharp had a down week this last week for Fresno State. He's 6% owned. His last 5 weeks targets are 9, 7, 16, 7, and then that dud last week of 2. That turns into a fantasy points of 18.2, 15.9, 21.1, 12, and then 5.7. 1 point PPR leagues. They've got San Jose State this week, then Hawaii for their next 2 weeks. I like Raylan Sharp. Toledo, Junior Vander Ross, 16% owned. He's just a great floor. He's averaging 15 points per game. His last 5 weeks, he's not seen less than 9 targets or 6 receptions. You need a nice floor. Junior Vander Ross, a good option. We like Keon Jenkins coming back for FIU. Dean Patterson, I think he had 6 targets, 1 reception last week, or 4 targets, 1 reception. Can't really remember, but he's 11% owned. He had a dud last week, but his last 5 games, it's been 18.9, 25.7, 12.4, 21, and then 8.9 fantasy points. And then Akron wide receiver Adrian Norton, 9% owned. Other than week 1, he's scored double-digit fantasy points in every contest. He averages 7 targets and 76 yards per game on the season. The Zips have been throwing the ball a lot this season. They're averaging 35 pass attempts to 25 rush attempts per game. Norton's leading the Zips in receiving yards with 541. Their next closest, 277 yards. In Norton's last 5 contests, he's seen 11, 9, 9, 7, and 13 targets. I like Norton for Akron. My next 5 guys are kind of more of those dart throws. Orion Singleton, Eastern Michigan, 8% owned. He's had 10, 11, 12, 6, and 7 targets in his last 5 games, which has equated to 16.9, 15.6, 18.6, 6.3, 6.3 fantasy points. So not so great the last couple weeks, but he's getting you the volume, and that's process over results sometimes. Well, except for when you need to win the game and you need the results over the process, but this will get you there. Okay. Kenneth Womack, 25% owned, double-digit points since he's returned from injury. He's a floor play. He's got 9 targets, 5 and 7 targets since he's returned. I like Kenneth Womack. He's got 1 touchdown on the year, which I think maybe matched or was more than what he got last year. I think maybe he had 0 on the whole year. I know he's not a touchdown getter.
I think he maybe had 1 or 0.
So he's got 1 so far in 4 games. So Justin Lockhart, San Jose State, 10% owned. I put him on here because it seems, that Egan, if he's the quarterback, he kind of seems to like Lockhart a little bit more, or at least doesn't hyper target Nash like Brown did. But he's had 15.72 points over the last 5 weeks. He hasn't had a game under 11 points or seen less than 7 targets in those weeks. He's had 2 weeks over 100 yards. So you need a boom bust guy, Justin Lockhart, an option there. And I mentioned earlier ECU, Chase Sewell, 15% owned over his last 4 weeks. He's seen 8, 7, 8, and 10 targets, averaging 15.48 points over that time frame. We'll see what this new look offense looks like, if there is a new look offense, new coach. But I like what Chase Sewell's doing here for ECU. Justice, you kind of highlighted, hey, this kind of matches up with when the quarterback change was. So maybe, Chase Sewell makes it to the next slide next week if we see this continuing. And then True Edwards, Louisiana Tech, 6% owned. Boom bust, his last 3 games. He's 3 games in his last 5, he's had over 100 yards. The other 2 games are under 40 yards. So in those games under 40, he had 8 receptions on 9 targets and 5 receptions on 7 targets. So he's getting the volume, it's just not down the field. Fantasy outputs of 32 points, 24.7, 11.9, 7.1, and 24.8.
And I feel like for him too, kind of like Chase Sewell, like his rise has kind of mirrored Evan Bullock's kind of rise as the quarterback there for the Bulldogs.
So I think this could be, again, True Edwards. If we'll see how the week looks this week, and he might make that first slide.
All right, tight ends. This group should look really familiar. I do have 1 new guy this week. Dorian Fleming, Georgia State, 24% owned, 2020 guy, 7 targets, 5 receptions, 51 yards per game. John Michael Gillenborg, still under that 30% threshold, only at 20%. He had a monster week this week, 24.7 points, 10 targets, 137 yards, and a touchdown. He's averaging 6 targets and 62 yards.
I'm
on the
nervous
season.
though. Like he's been shown out here the last couple weeks, but then going to this 2 QB system, I'm not feeling that. So I am kind of
Yeah,
interested to
we'll
see
see
how
how
he looks
that
going
works.
forward.
You know, Evan Svoboda is his roommate, so we'll see. I just think he's their best weapon in the passing game, and they've had to pass the ball more so in these games than they probably want to. Next, Terrence Carter, also a 2020 guy, 24% owned, averaging 4 catches of 67 yards per game. He's really come on strong the last couple weeks. New guy to this list, this waiver wire list, Blake Bosma, Western Michigan, 3% owned. In his last 4 games, he's gotten 12.3, 18.4, 5.8, and 32.5 points. As Luke was saying earlier, you know, Western Michigan runs a fast-paced offense, and Bosma looks to be that second option, if you will, behind Kenny Womack. And rounding out our tight ends is Taylor Thompson from James Madison, 14% owned. In his last 4 games, he has targets of 7, 9, 3, and 5, and he is averaging 10.37 points per game. And that's going to do it for our waiver wire honey this week. Come back next week.
All right, come back and join us next week as we discuss what happened in Week 9, as well as look forward to Week 10 of the 2024 season. And as always, bringing you up to date on all the latest news and happenings in the world of G5 college football. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're watching us on X, please give us a retweet, a like, and a follow. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please subscribe and leave those 5-star ratings and reviews. Remember, we've got our new merch line out there. If you want to support us, go ahead and make a purchase there. Justice dropped the link here in the chat.
The link is in the YouTube comments, and it's on it's pinned on our X page.
All right, and with that, we thank you all for your support, and until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.